Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin Hull, Director of Public Engagement at the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, D.C. I've really been looking forward to today's program, and I'm so happy to welcome you to what is sure to be a very interesting conversation between friends and collaborators, Nancy Baker Cahill and Kavya Pearlman. The Hirshhorn Museum was so excited to partner with the Art Production Fund this summer. Art Production Fund commissioned Nancy's augmented reality piece, Liberty Bell, which you can still experience here in Washington at the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool, as well as in 6 other cities across the United States. For those of you who may not be familiar, Nancy Baker Cahill is an American artist working at the intersection of fine art, new media, and activism. And Kavya Pearlman is an award-winning cybersecurity professional with a deep interest in immersive and emerging technologies. These two remarkable people from 2 completely different fields, or seemingly different fields, are going to touch on many topics today, including surveillance as a human rights issue and how we protect individual freedom and privacy through creative resistance. I want to also let you know that today's program is presented as part of the Smithsonian's 24 Hours in a Time of Change. So throughout today, the Smithsonian Museums are offering all kinds of virtual programs centered around important issues and topics from COVID-19 to social justice. You can find out more about these other programs by visiting the website 24hours.si.edu. That's the number 24hours.si.edu. But now I'd like to turn it over to our special guests, Nancy and Kavya. Welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I believe we're going to show a short video and then we'll welcome them onto the screen. So thank you so much.
For a team to succeed in their research and development plans without considering the implications of trust, privacy, inclusion, and safety. This is a fundamental question of my mission to support individuals, corporations, universities, and government entities. We want them to reach their goals of developing emergent tech while making sure that safe and inclusive experiences are at the forefront of every key decisions they make. My name is Kavya Pearlman, and I believe that it is critical for research and development teams to keep that question in mind. This is why I founded XR Safety Initiative. We believe in the potential of XR, VR, AR, and AI technologies as a driving force of good in the modern age. But we also recognize the risks and threats that reveal themselves through these tools. Our desire is to mitigate those risks. We do this by bringing together the brightest minds who have a passion for emerging technologies to work together towards these pillars of our research. The future is bold, unknown, and sometimes a little scary. But as we emphasize the prominence of this question and deliver resources that keep it in front of the eyes of the world's leaders in XR, we will find a future that is safe, secure, and full of hope. What if you could live the most beautiful dream that you've ever had as a reality? An image of an exotic garden, for instance, packed with moving details in multi-dimension. Well, guess what? You can even walk into these literal experiences and touch every single moving pattern along with your loved ones, even the ones that are alive and the ones that you may have lost. These are the promises of virtual reality, augmented reality technologies. And mark my words, all of us at some point are just about to embrace these technologies, experience these dreamlike experiences. In these virtual worlds, you can't just see the things, but you can interact with them like our perceived reality. And this is possible today as we use these augmented and virtual reality. So, with software as a building material, it's already begun revolutionizing many of these domains, transforming these handy devices to like crystal balls so we can walk into these realities and transform ourselves and gaze into our world more vividly, more deeply. Reality, as we know, is being replaced piece by piece with software. This is the new revolution. In this hyper compressed world of software technology, it is the 21st century, but it is also the Stone Age. And all these vast, complex software structures, simple machine of information structures are just being invented. We're inventing kind of like the wheel, the ramp. We are inventing the screw, the lever. We are reinventing touch. We are starting a new chapter in the technological history. Here's the thing though. Just this week, Germany's Federal Cartel Office, aka, and I'm going to butcher this, Bunderkartellmetz, this is German, um, they actually initiated a proceeding, an investigation into Facebook to examine a link between what is their virtual reality platform, Oculus VR, and their social network and the monopoly that is going on. Another bipartisan coalition of 48 attorneys just this week filed a lawsuit against Facebook to end its monopoly. People are standing up, and millions of consumers and many businesses that are harmed by these type of monopolies are asking questions about these behaviors. The thing is, these brave new worlds bring along with us this surveillance and threats to human rights. And that's why back in 2012, I read a book called Cyber War. And I was a hairstylist back then. After reading this book, I realized that our world is going to be a lot different in a few years. And I got busy preparing for it. I did my master's in network security. A few years later, I found myself working at Facebook doing third-party security in 2016 during US presidential election time. Right after that, I joined a virtual reality and the oldest existing virtual worlds maker, Second Life's maker, Linden Lab. I was terminated from that because I raised concerns about some of these issues that potentially harm children, minorities, and lots of different cybersecurity concerns. So the point is, these brave new worlds that we are building, these are dangerous, but at the same time exciting. I want to embrace these technologies, but we need to ask this question, are we ready? And that's the question that we're going to explore with my good friend and my colleague, Nancy Baker. Thank you, Nancy, for inviting me to this. Thank you, Hershon, for doing this. And let's dive in.
Wonderful. Kavya Pearlman, y'all. I am so excited to talk to you today. As Kevin mentioned, this conversation is occasioned by a project that was commissioned by the Art Production Fund called Liberty Bell, an AR public art project that I was very lucky to execute. And I cannot wait to tell you a little bit about that project and give a little context for why we're talking about surveillance technologies today, broadly speaking, in the ways that they affect all citizens who have access to technology, and even those that don't, by the way. I can't wait to talk about that. We have a lot to say about bystanders and different types of surveillance techniques in law enforcement, but also as it applies to new media, as it applies to XR. And when we say XR, what we mean is extended reality. And it's sort of a catchphrase that includes augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, and the reason why it's significant is because whatever precedent, as Kavya says, we are right at the cusp of this revolution, and we need to set precedent now. We need to set boundaries now, because as of right now, these companies, this pentopoly, if you will, have really run amok in the pursuit of profit. And it's all come at our expense. Their extractive practices, their data mining has come, and we all know this because we all lived through the 2016 election and Cambridge Analytica. So I already feel myself wanting to like bolt out of the gate here, but I want to just talk briefly about this art project because I have personally been thinking a lot about liberty and what liberty means, what liberty as a founding ideal means, you know, in a country that is at war with itself. And a lot of it aided and abetted, of course, by these tech giants and that sort of unfettered race toward progress. So I don't know if Amy, you can just show a slide. I want to just tell you about Liberty Bell. This is an art project that appears in 6 different historically significant locations across the United States. For Art Production Fund, and by the way, thank you, Hirshhorn, and thank you, Art Production Fund, for making this conversation possible. The wonderful Art Production Fund commissioned this project over 18 months ago, maybe it's like 20 months ago now. And it was originally intended for Philadelphia. They asked me to make a public art project for Philadelphia, and I started thinking about Philadelphia as a city and what I remember as a child from visiting there, and I couldn't help but think about the cracked Liberty Bell. And that to me felt like a very powerful metaphor in today's context, because it felt to me very much like sort of a cracked concept that has persisted, both from our genocidal origins of this country, founding origins, to, you know, a moment of extreme inequality, economic and racial inequality, police brutality, biased algorithms, now pandemic. Of course, we hadn't anticipated that would happen, civil unrest, misinformation, unchecked nationalism, all of the elements that have gotten us to where we are now. And what does liberty even mean in that context? And I kept thinking, well, this is such an abstract idea, and liberty for whom? And what I would add to this now is liberty, not just for whom, but liberty from whom or from what? You know, how do we grapple with the ways in which the sort of the data that's gathered without our knowledge, the predictive power that it has over our lives? How much freedom do we actually have when our emotions, our decisions, our purchases, most importantly, if we're going to talk about surveillance capitalism, which we will, how those things are controlled and out of our control, and how do we wrest that control back? And so in all of my work, I'm always interested in examining systems of power and systemic power, but also how do we resist? How do we fight back? And here is the piece. I don't know if we can enable sound over yeah. I wanted to create a flag that obviously involved the colors of the flag. And as the animation progresses and the soundscape gets more, arrhythmic and dissonant, we see an object that's really trying to kind of crawl out of its own skin, that is too at war with itself, but still intact. And so this appears just really briefly in Washington, DC, in Boston, Massachusetts, in the Rockaways, in Philadelphia itself, in Charleston, South Carolina, obviously site of the original Civil War, and in Selma, Alabama, where, because we knew we were going to launch this in an election year, we all know the voter suppression efforts and gerrymandering are well documented, and we really wanted to call attention to this historic site, especially for its history of civil rights and voting rights activism. So that's what occasioned this conversation. But one of the things I've thought a lot about in terms of surveillance, I've always been really interested in it from a very early age. And more from an intellectual perspective. But I think when I started to learn about Cambridge Analytica, and I know Kavya can speak to this far more eloquently than I can, but when I started to learn about their methodologies and how they influenced this, the most recent, the election prior to the most recent, who knows what influenced this one, I really started thinking about just how vulnerable we all are. And certainly as I got into tech and had to make decisions around my own app and how I could have a platform that would be as ethical as possible. In other words, like, I knew I didn't want to collect any data from users under any circumstances. Some of these considerations really became much more foregrounded. So I want to just maybe throw it to Kavya and ask her, we've both done a lot of studying of surveillance capitalism and its techniques. And, Kavya's obviously knows so much about what's going on in XR, but maybe you could just speak really briefly to Cambridge Analytica, to the sort of unholy alliance as well, in terms of law enforcement and some of the bigger companies like Microsoft. We know Microsoft and Amazon are intimately involved now with law enforcement, as well as startups like Clearview AI. How are we collectively vulnerable? And then especially in terms of coded bias, I'm throwing a lot at you right now, but in terms of biased algorithms, and specifically racial bias, and we have lots of resources we're going to share with you later, because there's heroic work being done around this, of course, right now. But how are we vulnerable collectively? And then how are specific populations vulnerable to all of this?
So, wow. And yes, it is a lot, but this is exactly when I was terminated, I got busy preparing for these type of moments. It starts with awareness, and that's what I'm going to dive into. So let's think about it. Few of the resources that Nancy and I are going to share with you, and through Hershon Smithsonian, one of them has a video from Alexander Nix from 2016, actually. And Alexander Nix is the former CEO of Cambridge Analytica. He's standing at this amazing platform where all these politicians are participating in this conversation in this video, and he's bragging how he took Cruz campaign from, being nothing and not very popular all the way to being prominent in that time. And he also brags one of the candidates in that election is actually using that same technology. But what he really points out and literally gives us the number is 5,000 unique data points on each US citizen is what he claimed at that moment. And I'm sure, what you hear in public, there is obviously always a lot more. Now, that was the Cambridge Analytica issue, where practically this Russian affiliated company came through the front door, used the legitimate features and scraped the data. And then there was a lot other hacks. I actually coined a term after working there. I call it cyber political engineering. So cyber means hacking the DNC, hacking various other means. There is another term called advanced persistent threat. These are software code that lurk around. When the timing is right, it will basically scrape up or weaponize all these things and then execute these malicious actors. So anyhow, all this targeting and micro-targeting was done using 5,000 data points. Now let's see.
Through Facebook.
That is through Facebook. Yes, exactly. So now let's look at XR. Earlier this year, actually in 2019, there was a research released by Stanford University that indicates over 2 million data points can be and are being potentially collected in 20 minutes of VR activity, 20 minutes of virtual reality activity. Another research that Stanford released just this year, a few months ago, where just 360-degree video accurately identified between the 500 users within a 5 minutes of time, one could accurately identify who it is that is watching the video based on your gaze data and the data points that it is collecting. So identity, as well as this idea of hoarding the data, it is really put us at a massive risk. The challenge here is these technologies are enabling more and more data collection. It's not even data collection. I call it the era of constant reality capture, in which everything about me is known to these monopolies, and they are just collecting more and more data. And not only that, we call them the walled gardens. The walled gardens are actually getting bolstered and stronger. Just this year, Facebook announced that they are going to now mandate everyone to require their social login for their virtual reality kit, Oculus VR, they used to call it, but now they call it Facebook Reality Lab because, of course, I can, I'm sure they can sense that this monopoly is being looked at by all eyes. All these lawsuits are not just coming out of ether. People are waking up and realizing what kind of a power these companies have. So this has now become a very important human rights issues. This year, we have seen Electronic Frontier Foundation write about it. If privacy, a lot of matters of privacy are being discussed. Access Now is another organization. And of course, XRSI, XR Safety Initiative that I formed, we remain at the forefront. And the thing is, we do work with these companies, but to educate them, to inform them, to interfere in this monopolization, to interfere in this sort of predatory practices, and to change this somehow, sometimes from the inside, but oftentimes by taking an activist stand, just like we are doing right now, is to create this sense of awareness is what is coming for us. These are human rights issues that cannot be left to the technologists or the tech bros. We have to solve it. We have to introduce the idea that this is it. This is the zeitgeist.
Yeah, and I love what you said. I mean, I think that part of what the problem is, and part of why we're so excited to talk about this, is there's so much opacity around these techniques and these extractive techniques. I mean, well beyond XR. XR is clearly like, the gold mine that's just waiting to happen. And one of the things that this incredible author, if you haven't read Surveillance Capitalism, you should. I say this to the audience. Shoshana Zuboff talks about these extractive practices allow these companies to aggregate certainties, and certainties, of course, are what's traded. And we can talk about it on a sort of a macroeconomic scale, but it really, these things have real life consequences for people. And I want to just maybe roll back a second and talk about ways in which, like, for example, technologies that everybody uses, right? Zoom. Let's just say walking down the street, recent protests. There are now so many ways that we can be tracked and identified that go well beyond, I was very concerned early on with my app because so much of my activist work in augmented reality relies on geolocation. So, we all know that location services pretty much identifies you right off the bat of where you are. Even with a VPN, I think VPNs are really awesome, and I have one myself, but like, I do think, in terms of, I've taken every precaution I can, but there are all these other ways you can be identified. And one of the things that I think has really been coming up a lot lately, and there's not a lot about this out there, but, now there's technology that can identify you by your gait. As you mentioned yesterday, I didn't realize this, I guess everybody's ears might as well be their thumbprints. And when you develop technology, hearing aids, we got to talk about gaslighting. When you develop technologies that in the guise of helping actually end up gathering so much more, as you say, in this predatory manner, to know us better than we know ourselves, essentially. And this is true for all the predictive behavioral data that they've got, or behavioral assets that they now have. So I want to talk about that. And I also want to talk about the ways in which, for example, there's this wonderful film called Coded Bias. I hope everybody watches it, that, white supremacy is also embedded in all of these practices. And I don't mean to just sort of throw a lot of names and books out at you, but I also would urge everyone to read Simone Brown's Dark Matters, which is about the surveillance of brown bodies. And she really traces surveillance technologies back to slavery, the time of slavery, that branding and marketing of enslaved people were the first forms of the commodification and marketing of, and biometric extraction of our fellow citizens. So, you know, there's just so much to consider, you know, from the simplest, like I'm walking down the street and there may be a camera, or I'm an activist and that camera can identify me. There are artists doing amazing work around this. Zach Blass, everyone should look at his work, developing masks that obfuscate. I'm working on a project right now that's an anti-surveillance wearable. But, you know, so really just from being out in the world to using this. I mean, we all have not we all, but a lot of people have a black mirror. And whether you do or you don't, you can be captured on camera. If you're in a Zoom classroom, we've seen this happen. There's this direct, they talked about this in the surveillance talk, you know, direct, you know, Zoom home invasion to prison pipeline now, because this is this invasive interface that is not equitable on any level. And we can get into access to tech and accessibility as well, which is a whole other issue of liberty. But I'm sorry, I know I'm all over the place, but I'm trying to sort of wrap this in a bow in the sense that like these are things that everyone is affected by and needs to think about. And especially as like we discovered yesterday a paper on augmented reality glasses, which, as you say, we are developing these tools now. So and it's all about bystanders. So what happens to you when you capture, not to you, but when someone captures you, they're walking around with their glasses and they are recording you and your data is being uploaded at all times. How do we guard against that? How do we put protections in place now? What is available to us as everyday citizens, as artists? I mean, I know what I've tried to do in my app, and I'm also concerned that some of the work that I've done, you know, is that space, that augmented reality space, will be monetized, it will be surveilled, and it will be policed. And so, Kavya, tell us, please tell us what we can do as citizens to start to grapple with this and not to feel overwhelmed, not to feel like we have no choice, no agency in the matter.
Right. And Nancy, yes, that is a lot of points, but they're also important point to these conversations. So I want to start with first identity issue. And identity is so personal to me. I grew up in India, and as most of you saw, my picture at the moment is a Muslim woman, but I was not always Muslim. I grew up as a Hindu, and I was very secular. I even had a Facebook account at one point when I moved to the United States in 2007. I was a hairstylist, just chilling out, doing my thing, no problem. I converted to even Judaism, and I didn't care, you know, like, okay, well, you know, now my last name is Pearlman and, you know, everything is okay. But then in 2012, this awakening happened. I got rid of my Facebook and everything, and then I started to educate myself. But then when I joined Facebook itself, and this is the transition of identity and how that puts us as at threat. I walk into the Facebook office where it says, be social, connected. And Nancy, you know how, you know, it's very compelling, social, and you feel like, wow, you're in such a wonderful place. You want to be nice to everybody, and you want to be social with everybody. And at least that's the pressure for those so-called values: be open and be connected. Anyhow, I was under pressure to then create a Facebook account. I went to my boss and I said, hey, do I need to? She's like, hey, you know what? Just throw some couple of pictures up there and that would be fine. What I had not realized in this time is that I never, and strategically and intentionally knowing what I call them my Make India Great Again distant relatives who are very strict Hindus. In fact, one of my uncles, with his bare hand, it's a really difficult thing to admit, but I think he potentially killed Muslims. He's dead now, but he wasn't then. And what happened is, as soon as I put these pictures on, Facebook's AI started to connect me with all these Make India Great Again folks. And then started coming in the death threats is, dare you not come to India or we will kill you. And that was my moment of like, oh, okay, what is going on here? And then a friend of mine told me, oh, your privacy default settings, you need to change them. But I was like, oh, well, it's already too late now. And at that point, I said, you know what? I am going to embrace this issue. Well, I'm not going to India for now, but at some point, this all going to go away. My parents are now very supportive. Everything is okay. But the identity, and that's just the story of one person. Think about the data that was collected against the Muslims in Myanmar. And there was a whole genocide that nobody talks about. There are reports that are being produced, but millions of these type of stories. Think about LGBTQ folks, where their identity is disclosed against their wish. How much risk are people putting themselves in unknowingly? I'm a person who kind of cares about privacy, but I didn't know that this is the way the world works. But thankfully, I've educated myself. And now what I do is I share this story to then create awareness and also to hold people accountable. There is a person who surprisingly now works at Facebook and used to be a lobbyist, and he told me, if you want to fight the power, get the power to fight. I don't know whose words are those, but that is precisely what I got busy doing. Is with XR Safety Initiative, started to prepare some kind of a baseline standard, understanding of how this technology and emerging technologies, it is not just this XR. There is a cross section of artificial intelligence, a super powered infrastructure of communication that's coming for us. It's almost here, 5G. Then there is the brain computer interfaces that are being developed. So collectively, all of these technologies convergence is really causing concerns. And that's why we're keeping up with these technologies to try to inform people. Some of the information that is really important to understand, we often talk about biometric data. And earlier you mentioned Clearview AI. That's another thing, these sort of practices, when somebody comes with a warrant to these companies, they have to hand over the data. And while the laws are only limited to biometric data protection thus far, and thank God they are, and there are, all these wonderful individuals that you mentioned, they are amazing, and they are, speaking up. Some of them are getting fired. I mean, AI ethicists are getting fired. This is like appalling to me. But I mean, I cried that day when I heard the news, because my DMs were flooded and everybody was reflecting back how every time a minority speaks up, she has to go through humiliation, rejection. And I tweeted out, I hope to God she starts a AI safety initiative and takes a stand and tells us, what she believes in, because these voices must be heard. So going back to these artificial intelligence, there is a term that we coined at XR Safety Initiative. So just this year, right before Facebook, at Facebook Connect in September, they announced, this login mandate for their Oculus Reality Kit. They announced augmented reality glasses, calling it the research project, and it is going to constantly capture the data. And you talked about the bystander. Uh, XRSI participated in one of the design jam sessions right before the launch. And this is a question that we even explored together with this company. What could potentially be the solution? And the fact is, just hanging a badge while wearing this thing and putting a shirt on that you're getting recorded, it doesn't really serve much of a right. Like, what about my consent? So we said, okay, well, maybe you can use some kind of a phone pop-up that says, hey, you're being recorded if you're in the proximity. But they want to capture you. This was the very interesting and surprising thing is, hey, we want to get you in your natural state, in the way you are. And so that is a remarkable thing to notice, is they really want to grab your reality, and at some point maybe and potentially even upload our likeness, which is already, we have seen the prototypes of it. Earlier this year there was a viral video about a mother in Korea who was crying in talking to this virtual reality child. The same exact likeness of this person was recreated in VR. And it was just, I played that video once at Michigan University. I will never make that mistake. There was a mother in the audience and she just could not stand it. It was just too compelling. So imagine how these companies could potentially exploit our emotions, exploit our identity, that micro targeting that we were talking about. Oh no, they really want to see you in your natural state. And this is more than just micro targeting. This is actually using us as the product. And it has been going on, but it is getting worse now because artificial intelligence algorithms are making choices on behalf of humans. So, another something that I feel really appalled about, and a lot of these companies continue to say this, and I'm going to refer to a tweet that, this wonderful colleague of mine, she is in South Africa, I believe, and she practices AI. She said, an AI ethics approach that deals in abstract people and this universal notion of humanity is the one that fails to recognize from the outset the very fact that different group of people, individuals, demographics, people that are different are harmed differently, harmed indifferently by these AI algorithm. And these kind of practices is exactly what that AI ethicist Timnit was talking about, is putting our lives, our individual lives, think about the collection of like the millions of people at risk.
Yeah, and I would also refer everyone to Race Against Technology by Ruha Benjamin, a recent book that was written that addresses this directly as well. Yeah, I mean, everything you said, Kavya, is so compelling. And I think, just because I see that we're closing in on our time for our conversation, I want to leave, we barely scratched the surface too of art and the role of the artist in this new landscape, and how artists can be intentional and be educated and be intentional and exercise as much responsibility, but I would also say as much find the subversive potential in these technologies, that the technologies themselves have enormous power. And sometimes it takes artists who think outside the box, who enjoy using all kinds of tools in unorthodox ways, to find these sort of slippery opportunities for subversive activity, and to be able to message and counter message. I want to just note the fact that, like, I look at Gen Z and they understand a lot of these concepts just natively, and they do all kinds of things. Look what they did in Tulsa to disrupt Trump's rally using TikTok. On Instagram, they'll often form aggregate group identities so that those algorithms are constantly thwarted in what they're trying to sell. And the original, let's face it, the original Pokemon Go was developed, yes, to get people out of their houses and all of that, but really it was to get your butt out of your house and into stores to buy stuff. So how can we as artists, try and use this technology? Certainly with Fourth Wall, I'm interested in prompting as much kind of thoughtful discourse around these urgent issues. And I've been so fortunate to collaborate with so many extraordinary artists who are working rigorously around these topics and who put themselves at risk, right? If they're outspoken about various subjects. You talked about whistleblowers. And I think one of the things that I personally find really alarming is that it would appear that whistleblowers of all stripes, not just in our industry, but take the scientist in Florida whose house was just raided because she countered DeSantis's COVID numbers. There are real life consequences to speaking out. And, I think about Black Lives Matter. and the vulnerability of so many activists, and the ways in which, you know, we had people being snatched off the streets. So even though, yes, there's a new administration coming in, I don't think for 1 second any of us should be complacent, because it's not just a governmental, it's not just about government surveillance. It is corporate surveillance. It's surveillance capitalism. And it's going to require, in my opinion, more diversity in technology and in development and in research to ensure that, for example, that a white face isn't the default face for facial recognition, so that there's all kinds of opportunity for misidentification. I mean, all of these things are a double-edged sword. And you and I talked last night about this idea that they're presented to the public as being for our benefit, right? This hearing aid is for your benefit. These augmented reality things are for your benefit. You get to connect with all your friends. You get to show your art. You get to do this. And it's gaslighting. It's not for our benefit by any stretch. If it were, they wouldn't be so sneaky and secretive and opaque about their practices. So I know that we only have a few more minutes. So I know you have something in conclusion, and I want to cede the floor to you. And then after you speak, I'd love to just open it up to Q&A, because I'm sure people have a lot of questions. I hope they do anyway.
Yeah. And that is so correct, Nancy. But in the closing, you know, and we've talked a lot. I encourage everyone to, you know, learn about it. I know those of you worry about like privacy and identity, just like I do, especially in the XR domain, because that's where my focus is at the moment. All I want to say to you is you're not alone. Even if you're exploring this brave new domain, you're not alone. Just yesterday, Nancy and I and a couple of my colleagues at XRSI, we curated our thoughts, cybersecurity advice into this guide, which we are also going to include. And that includes some of the cybersecurity, cyber hygiene practices, some of the advanced principles of how to, you know, we need to protect identity. So all I want to say to you, you're not alone. We're in this together with you. These big tech firms are building walls while we attempt to build bridges. Walls of monopoly, they're being cemented by billions of dollars being spent to collect massive amount of data around citizens around the world under the guise of research, under the guise of philosophy or philanthropy. And we will always stand up to them. And as we look to 2021, there is one thing that I want you to remember. When it comes to XR, it all comes down to what kind of reality do we want to create? If we prioritize protection of identities over monopoly, tolerance over prejudice, humanity over greed, privacy over the race to make the next best. There is a term in XR, it's called the next killer app. And I just, you know, it's appalling, the next best killer app, and safety over ignorances, then maybe, just maybe, we can extend realities in a trustworthy manner. We can still have these virtual worlds for free speech and free expressions, where someone like myself, who, you know, didn't read the 70-page privacy policy, didn't fully comprehend one point in my life, and didn't check the right boxes and slide the right slider to enable these settings, are not put at risk and are not threatened for their life just because we forgot to change some settings. And when this happens, who is going to stand up for us? I mean, New York Attorney General, myself included, Nancy Baker, interjecting, doing these inceptions of an idea through this amazing immersive artwork. This is our purpose. And that's why this is what we are going to do. So do not despair. We are providing you tons of resources. We are here along with a lot of caring, thoughtful, wonderful people who will help us investigate and help us navigate how to go into this uncharted territory with awareness or around safety, around ethics, around our overall well-being. So with that, I just want to thank you for taking this, audacious step to listen in and pay attention to all these sometimes heavy words to me as well. I tell Nancy, I'm like, you're so well read. These words sometimes seem too intimidating, but this is the zeitgeist. This is our reality. These lawsuits are not happening just out of the ether. They are here to protect us, and we have to protect ourselves. Privacy controls, of course, they can give you any privacy controls, but we have to be actively executing and protecting ourselves. So get engaged and get involved and go into these brave new worlds with awareness, is what I would say.
Yay. Thank you, Kavya, for your eloquence and leadership, fearless leadership. So if we have any questions, I'd love to just read them out, and we'll, between the two of us, answer them to the best of our ability. Oh, sorry, they're right here. So April Boyd Noronha, forgive me if I mispronounced. As a college professor, how can the ecosystem collaborate with academia? Wow, that's a great question. Kavya, what do you think?
So, well, first of all, I do know April Boyd Norona, and she works together with me. She is the president of this wonderful Cyber XR coalition. So thank you, April. And of course, we have to continue that discussion afterwards as well. This is a really, really, really good point. So just when I talked about this mandated login with Oculus Kit, Facebook login, this is kind of the same sort of a question where these ecosystems demand a certain kind of rule set, and academia is just not compatible with it, because FERPA, which is a federal education regulatory act that requires educational institutions to protect student data, if you use these devices or these ecosystems, there is no protection. And, as a former chief information security officer, I can tell you their CISO, and I confirmed this with one of the, collaborators, Jeremy Nelson, who is the director of XR Institute at University of Michigan, they will confiscate your device. This is not allowed. This is illegal currently to explore these, or at least force students to do this. So one thing they have done is, and in fact, we are part of some of these efforts, is taking it to the policy level. So demanding Facebook that there needs to be some kind of an alternate ecosystem, but at the same time, reaching out to things like Reality Caucus at the congressional level, state level, to change these policies of the ecosystem. Why are they forcing us to be put into these closed walls, get all of our data, and then potentially ingest that into their AI? That should not happen. And we have to stop that. And that's why we need to come together and figure these solutions out, collaborate, and, dive deeper into these issues.
Yeah, and I would just add to that is to the extent that you can evangelize our need for concern across disciplines and in interdisciplinary forums, that's another way to ensure that we have these conversations. We have another question from Sam Bilbo. Nancy, you spoke about the subversive potential for AR art. Do you mind speaking a little bit more about the specifics of this? Do you think some of the this potential is for AR to unveil the true realities of big businesses? And Sam, thank you so much for asking that. One of the things that first appealed to me about AR as a medium was the fact that it is both there and not there, that it exists in this virtual space as a layer of added reality, but you can't see it with the naked eye. And for me, I think particularly because a lot of my work is political in nature and site activated, although we are now being advised to use the language of idea activation versus site activation for reasons I mentioned earlier. I think that the subversive potential is that it's almost like a secret that is in space that can illuminate, let's say, a forgotten history, an erased history, an idea. a topic that hasn't been fully explored. You know, there's so much contested land, so many contested monuments, spaces, ideas, communities that have been affected so deeply by all of the things I talked about in the beginning. And AR to me, or AR art, allows for us to explore some of those things in a way that is empowering. You know, I was really privileged to host a project recently called In Plain Sight that was organized by extraordinary artists here in LA. And they organized skywriting of messages of solidarity and empowerment to immigrants who are being detained in prisons and ICE detention centers illegally all over the country, and having their human rights denied on a regular basis. But because because that's it's even more ephemeral than AR, we ended up putting a number of the messages over these sites in AR, which is where they are. Yes, here's a perfect example by Suru for Solidarity and Karen Ishizuka. This is just one example, and you can see more of them on fourthwallapp.org. But I think that, you know, it's a way of communicating to people without, and while protecting, it's sort of this, it allows for this, the they're not there-ness of it. And I've talked about this a lot, and I'm not going to go on about it, but AR has this wonderful sort of ghosting quality where once you know it's there, it sort of lives in that space, and it triggers your memory. And to me, if you're moved by something, if you're curious about something, you will remember it. Will it spur you to action? Maybe. But even if it just causes you to think a little bit more deeply about a subject, it's made an impact. And of course that it could be used to illuminate those things about big tech. I would leave that to an artist for whom that is their primary objective. It hasn't been mine, but yes, of course. I want to just quickly, I know we're short on time. Joyce, I hope I answered your question, Sam. And if I didn't, please feel free to follow up with me. Joyce Power says, Kavya, you are so inspiring. I agree wholeheartely with you. Why is it the default on a platform is not set to protect you outright, but is instead consumer beware?
Well, I have been asking that question for myself for a long time, is why did this information reach my parents' ear through an AI algorithm? And why was I not given a choice to meet with them in person and explain to them what my religion means to me? So it's because they're predators. It's because they don't give a shit about us. It's because they want all of your data so they could use you, abuse you, and not care. And they call it people centric. We are not just the people. I'm a human being, damn it. I have rights, and those rights are being threatened. And that's the problem. We are not being seen, heard, and being treated as human beings. And this is going to happen more and more as these AI ethicists get fired for speaking out, as their algorithms, they have the audacity to even make those walls even larger and stronger and tell us, if you want a cheaper headset, by the way, talking about accessibility, beware. In the name of accessibility, let's give headsets to all, make it cheaper. Well, guess what? You know, a person who buys this cheaper headset or a cheaper product or a free product for the sake of convenience, for the sake of meeting their grandmother through Facebook Live or any other technology, isn't going to know what boxes to check, and off they suck your data. I think Sushana Zuboff said in one of her talks is like they are waiting to, they know your vulnerability first by tracking you, by watching you, and then they are waiting to exploit it. And when I say they, I don't mean the people that are literally the individual one-on-one. Sometimes I work with them, I work there, they are good people. But as a collective monopolistic, this multi-billion-dollar power that grows, that's what I'm talking about. And that's why this revolution to sort of like, you know, divide them or separate some of these businesses, because collective power of data, the big data, it's beyond big data right now. It is way beyond surveillance. It is surveillance capitalism. That's what threatens us. So that's probably why, because they know our vulnerabilities. They know we are human beings, but they don't want to treat us as one.
Yeah, And okay, just we have a few. The questions here are so amazing, and I will try and answer them in a timely way because we want to get through a few more. But an anonymous attendee says it's all overwhelming but important. Thank you. Is there one resource you cited that you recommend as a starting point, and a few simple steps that one may take to begin to get control of identity back? And I would just, Kavya, you may want to answer that one.
I
just
certainly do. Yeah, because you and I worked on this artist guide for awareness. So Extend Reality with Awareness guide is now available at xrsi.org. So start there. One thing, beware. I mean, this guide is very simple. It says, install a password manager, protect your, put 2FA, two-factor, check if your privacy has been compromised, download a VPN. But, the thing about today is privacy, as they say, called dead, but I don't think it's dead. It's being redefined. It's almost like if I invite you into my house, I want to invite you into my living room and not my bedroom. And that's the notion we have to live with, and hope that, change these policies, get involved there. So start with that artist guide. It goes a little bit further advanced. One thing, be aware that a lot of the people would tell you, and there
Hi,
are some
Catherine.
people in my
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
and some people in my circle, they're like,
Totally.
hey,
Yeah,
what
yeah,
if we
that's
do
perfect.
data monetization? That would be something that could solve this problem. What if people could get money for putting their data out there? Well, guess what would happen is, if I'm a poor person and I know if I can get $100 by signing up for this app, sometimes I went to Victoria's Secret store once and they were signing up this app for $1 and you could buy $30 product if you just install this app. So I am literally just giving away my data to this $1 app without ever knowing if there was any security review done, who's taking this data, what's happening to this data. So beware, people will try to tell you, hey, we will give you money for your data. I'm not in favor of this. And start with that artist guide, get engaged with some of the, coalitions and activists that are taking stand, like EFF is a great resource. In fact, Nancy, you said there is an app that they developed as well, right?
Oh, yeah. So just to piggyback on that, and actually to fold in Rachel Yezbik's wonderful comment as well. I'm just going to quickly read her comment because it is related. She says, wow, thank you so much for this great conversation. I appreciate that this conversation points to the direct root of this issue, which is unlegislated corporate power to set standards for gathering user data and implementing algorithms without regulation. As we know, non-tech corporations also influence tech companies' algorithms by applying pressure to benefit their corporate image and profit margin. Absolutely. What can we as artists, academics, et cetera, do to put pressure on politicians to regulate presently unregulated tech? And what I would say to that, and to answer the former question, is on our resource guide, yes, EFF has an amazing link, like XRSI, of actual legislative, like what you can do to influence legislators. And it's very up to date. And they also independently developed an amazing VR experience. We never talked about this, sousveillance, which is watching the watchers, which allows you to spot the police surveillance. So it actually trains you, and I'm sure you can use it because they are, very equitable. I'm sure you can probably access it from a PC. In fact, I know you can because I read that. You don't have to have a headset, but it's a VR experience that allows you to identify different types of surveillance in the world. What I was talking about earlier of just walking down the street. So that's just another way. But I would say EFF is, Rachel, a time-tested, amazing resource. XRSI, the whole list that we posted is hopefully going to be really useful to people. We did everything from academic papers to websites to movies, documentaries, books. But as I know Rachel personally, and she has educated me on a lot of this. So she probably knows half of that list already. Really quickly, Lynette Floyd from YouTube asks us, can you say more about cyber hygiene effects? How cyber hygiene affects different practices. As a musician and to our community, there's a steering mechanism for audiences and the artists and listening practices.
Right. Cyber hygiene is so important. It is the very baseline of the new way of living. We can no longer, and in fact, a couple of the people I have tried to recruit at my organization, and recruit when I say like I onboard them for volunteering, and I realize they're not using password manager. And then how do I give them access to certain things if they don't have a password manager. Without a password manager, which is a basic cyber hygiene thing, you cannot have any bot can potentially detect your password easily. It's in mostly in the hacking context or cybersecurity context, it's not the humans that we are most worried about, it's the automated tools that we humans cannot easily combat. So we need to rely on these, other encryption technologies and privacy protection technologies, such as there is another wonderful extension, Ghostry. I have always installed and put it as an extension. There are some extensions that are really helpful. So when I pitched to this artist that you need to use password manager, she's like, no, I'm not going to install extension. And I was like, let me share with you. And so I would go back to that artist's guide. There is some cyber hygiene practices, because on a day-to-day, we don't think about these things. Oh, okay, I've got my password, is fine. I'm just, dialing in from Starbucks. Well, no longer, because we are all at home. And even at home, you don't know who in your neighborhood might be someone like me or someone like my friends who maybe, the first time I kind of, go into a rented building, that's one of the things that I've always done is scan the network, be like, okay, who is Rabbit? Who is this? And so there are, in the guise, there is a lot of malicious actors who will eavesdrop on your traffic, listen into and steal your password. So some of these cyber hygiene practices will just make you put your mind at ease after now today, that you know that these threats are really real and they are literally watching you, listening you, tracking you at all times. These are some of the combative practices. And so your risk profile is, in cybersecurity, we have this term called risk. We can never get rid of 100% of the risk unless you are ready to close yourself in a box and throw yourself under the ocean or something. That's not going to happen in this ever connected era of, technology. These are the steps that we have to take just to put our minds at ease. And then we have to do more, what we earlier talked about, at the policy level, at the activist level, and just in the general awareness, be more engaged and be more active.
Okay, so we have time for one more question, and it's from Christopher Kojar. He says, you mentioned new forms of art that aren't necessarily rooted in surveillance, but employ the same technologies. Are either of you aware of any artists of color who may be using such technologies, and if they find alternative means for biometric tech? There are so many incredible artists working in new media and artists of color. And, I don't necessarily want to single anyone out because I'll offend others, but yes, this is an increasingly rich and diverse landscape. I think, though, that all of us who work in this, all of the artists who work in this arena, and particularly those of us who do rely on location services, and that might just be a very small number, but certainly anyone who's addressing some of this subject matter in their work, I think that we're all, it's incumbent on us again to educate ourselves and to be aware and to be critical of the technologies even as we employ them. And Christopher, there's a wonderful book out by an artist named Legacy and a curator and thinker named, writer named Legacy Russell called Glitch Feminism that you might enjoy, who really actually talks in a fascinating way about how the glitch is this, and glitch in technology and those slippery moments of in-betweenness are incredible sort of opportunities for empowerment and subversion as well. So that's another book I would recommend. I should have thrown it on the list. It wasn't directly related, but it is related to your question specifically. So let's see. So I just think we should we're out of time. I personally just want to thank, first of all, Kavya for this incredible conversation, for being so incredibly inspiring. I don't know what I would do if she weren't at the helm of this kind of research and advocacy. It gives me hope, it gives me strength to continue and pursue my work along this line, and I know it will others. And I also really want to thank the Hirshhorn, of course, and our production fund, who are extraordinary partners. And your solidarity and support is so deeply appreciated. So thank you so much, and thank you to everyone who joined us and stuck with us. And please follow up if you have any questions.
Thank you to you, Nancy, as well.
Okay, and there was a message in the chat from the Hirshhorn, but thank you all. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And let's all practice some great cyber hygiene. Bye.